Hello, everyone. My name is always Asmal. Welcome to another episode of Tooways to Skin a Cat, a show where we talk career experiences, entrepreneurship, and investments. The main aim is to show that there's more than one way to be successful other than just climbing the corporate ladder. We are live on LinkedIn and YouTube, and the show will be available on podcast by tomorrow morning. If you're joining us live, please drop a one in the comments so that we know we're not talking to ourselves, and drop a two in the comments if you're watching the recording. My guest for this week is Phiona Martin, award-winning industrial psychologist, career coach, and thought leader in the field of talent management and career development. She's also an entrepreneur, and I'd also like to add a radio and TV personality. Phiona, thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Let's jump straight into questions. So tell us your story. Maybe where do you come from outside of work? Who is Phiona Martin? Give us that backstory.
I actually had someone ask me a similar question the other day, and I shared a similar sentiment that I find it very difficult to describe myself outside the context of my profession, because in my identity and my profession I sort of intertwined, so to speak. So even the hobbies or the things I do for leisure are very much linked to career development. But in terms of my background, so I'm one of those people that, when I enrolled into university, I just always felt at home, studying organizational psychology. It wasn't something that I was exposed to or that I even knew what it was, going into it. But I knew that I loved psychology, but at the same time, I wasn't really drawn to, the clinical psychology, the counseling psychology, etc. For me, it was more, I loved the workplace. I loved the corporate type of sector. And I guess organizational psychology is almost the perfect intersection or the perfect marriage between psychology and, solving problems within the workplace. After I graduated, I went on to my first job. In fact, my first job was not even related to anything that I studied before. So, especially for young people, I remind them of this because I know the pressures of graduating and getting into your dream job. But I would say probably the first maybe 5 to 6 years of my career, I was doing jobs that were okay, right? And after my first jobs, I was able to move more into like a human capital sort of field. But the work didn't really set my heart on fire. I enjoyed certain tasks. I thrived in certain areas. Some I really was not engaged in. But for me, it really was a discovery, because through that process and in the reflections that I had, I always kept coming back, to the organizational psychology and asking myself, what exactly do I want to do? And those questions for me could only be answered by being exposed to the workplace, because as a graduate, you've got the theory, you've got an idea of what you think the workplace is, and then you get into the workplace and it's nothing like what you're prepared for. So those experiences for me were really valuable because they helped to shape me. In fact, I would almost say it was a very reflective time, because I would get into a job, I would enjoy it, then sometimes find myself getting bored after a year or so. And I thought, is there something wrong with me? Why is it that? But I think because I wasn't really doing the things that fulfilled me, and it was through that reflection, that I thought, what are the problems that I love solving, and where do I want to spend most of my time? So it's only actually about 5 years after I left university, because I graduated, finished my honors, that I then enrolled into a master's. And so it's only about 5 years later that I only qualified about 2 years later. That's how long it took. I did it long distance. So I guess I got into my dream role or my dream profession, so to speak, about 7 or so years after my initial graduation. And I mean, the time, those 5 to 7 years for me were absolutely invaluable, because they did help to shape me. And in fact, even the skills that I gained at jobs that I felt lukewarm about were very useful, because they ultimately were able to build me up for where I was going. So I don't think any of those opportunities were wasted opportunity. So it was a matter of actually, what skills can I get while I'm in this place that can take me closer, to my dream role, or to where it is that I want to end up. And yeah, I guess that's almost like my career journey, and I haven't really looked back. As you know, majority of the work that I do. So from a corporate side, I work within talent management, and that's basically helping companies manage their talent in very simplistic terms, through processes, through programs, and just through different interventions. And I'm also very passionate about career development, which I guess is a subset of talent management, as well as organizational psychology. And I think that's really where my calling is in life. It's also my day job, but definitely a calling, because I just have this overwhelming desire, so to speak, to help people navigate work. And I know that many of us, there's no blueprint. In fact, there isn't. Yes, there's a lot of strategies, etc. But the majority of us, we had to learn through trial and error. So it really is my endeavor to just equip with people, especially with tools that they can easily adopt to help them, navigate this jungle that is the workplace.
Okay, no, I mean that gives a good summary of your professional side. But let's say before university, where are you from originally? Gauteng?
No, not Gauteng at all. So I'm actually born in Zimbabwe, and
Okay.
I lived in other parts. I lived in Cote d'Ivoire at some point, which is the Ivory Coast. And then I went to an international school in South Africa. So I was very much exposed, I guess, to a very international community, so to speak, from a very young age. So I'm used to versatility, especially from a Pan-African perspective, because from my high school and I think through my early childhood experiences, I was just always exposed to different people in parts of Africa. And I think also that helped to shape me and just to open me up, to just different backgrounds, different perspectives.
Child of Africa. I like it. I've seen also that you've started your own business. Now, what made you start, and what made you decide to start your own business instead of staying in corporate? Because I mean, someone with a CV like yours is probably destined for senior leadership in corporate. So talk us through that.
Good question. So I must say, Ways, I don't really think I necessarily have a fixation about the type of employment that I'm in. So whether it's freelance or in full-time employment, or it's self-employment, entrepreneurship, etc., gig work, right? For me, it's about, can I do the work that I enjoy, and can I make the impact that I want to make? So I guess for a season, or within majority of my career, I've been in the corporate space. Before, I guess, going into full-time entrepreneurship, I did have a gap within my career where I freelanced. So I was freelancing with a lot of consulting houses, and I think that sort of gave me a bit of a taste in terms of the entrepreneurship world. But what made me decide? I think it was the right time, and it's something that was always in my career goals. So for many people, they might have felt, in some instances, people will think that it's something that you decided like a month before you resigned, but it's something that was always an intention of mine. And I also felt that it would give me carte blanche to almost, I guess, shape the work that I wanted to do, the impact that I wanted to make. I do also enjoy corporate. I mean, a lot of the work that I do, even within my own business, is actually very similar to the work that I did in corporate, except of course, now I'm self-employed. So the nature of the work for me is key in terms of actually what problems do I have the capacity to solve, and of course the type of employment can differ. So I'm in entrepreneurship now. I can go back so I can go back to employment, back to entrepreneurship. So for me, it's not really linear. Whereas I know there are certain people who are entrepreneurs at heart, right? Where it's like, actually, for me, the corporate place is not for me, and employment is not for me. So where they have a passion for the entrepreneurship identity as well as the work that they do. Whereas with me, I feel like I can play in both spaces, so to speak, because it's more so about the work and the impact, so to speak. And of course, the work that I do is also needed within both spheres.
Okay, so where you can add the most value. I like it. For the audience, if you've got any questions for Phiona, please add them to the comments now. We'll answer all of them towards the end. But if you send them in too late, we might miss them. So please add your questions. So Phiona, you meet and you coach many professionals. What is the biggest issue that keeps coming up, or the problem that they raise the most?
I must say, right, and I'm not sure if it is this era that we're living in, but toxic workplaces is something that has become so common. And in fact, we even, I guess, see it as well in research in terms of the documentation. But toxic workplaces, toxic leaders, toxic environments, in some instances, toxic colleagues. But that's something that a lot of people come to me for help in terms of navigating. I also find, just in terms of where people are at a particular crossroad. So it's a case where they need to decide on their next big step or their next challenge, and they're not quite sure how to think through it or how to navigate that. So it could be a case, where it could even be early career, perhaps people wanting to switch careers, or where they feel that, I'm not really enjoying what I'm doing. I'm not feeling engaged, but I don't necessarily know what my next is. And they just want help to think through that. Yeah. So it really, I think anything that has to do with the workplace, with navigating, with individual strategies, especially for you to deal with, the different dynamics that we get within the workplace, that's really where my area of speciality lies. And particularly where the individual feels that they've exhausted their own resources and their own thinking, and they feel that, okay, I now need some sort of professional intervention to help me think through this and to help me chart through this path.
Okay, toxic workplace is not. I wouldn't have thought that first time, but that's very interesting. So, I mean, in terms of the
Absolutely.
current job, in terms of the current job market, or where do you see being the most available opportunities? Is it a specific industry? Is it a specific type of role? Where is job market going?
Yeah, very good question. So I guess from a macro perspective, what are we seeing, or what can we expect in the job market? The impact of COVID has been disparate across the industries, and we know that, especially for individuals. And if we look at last year around level 5, level 4, where there were very strict restrictions. And the privilege of being able to work from home is not afforded to everyone, so to speak. So the professions or the industries that we have seen, of course, struggle the most, especially last year, and some are even still reeling, are those where the work that they were doing was not considered, what you call it, was not considered as part of the primary services
Yes,
that
yes,
we're
yes,
allowed
yes.
to operate.
Essential
Yet,
services, yes.
yes, sorry, essential. So that's the word I was looking for. So they were not essential services, and it was a case where that work could only be done physically. So for the people that who have the privilege, and it indeed is a privilege, that had the privilege of being able to work virtually, those companies were able to operate with, of course, minimal to low disruption, especially where you have a big concentration of knowledge workers, of workers that are able to do their work from home. And of course, companies, even in instances where they were not thinking about allowing or enabling people to work from home, were forced to do that. So yeah, those are the careers that have unfortunately the industries that have unfortunately mostly suffered. So it has been disparate. And in fact, it's the same impact that we saw with 4IR, right? Although I think it was happening perhaps at a little bit of a slower pace. We find that individuals who are in low and semi-skilled industries, women also in particular, are at most risk and at most vulnerable, particularly with these changes that we see occurring. And especially where you cannot easily adapt, in terms of, your skill set or upskill yourself to be able, let's say, for example, to take advantage of the virtual opportunities that have opened up, so to speak. So it really is disparate. And I think for me as a job seeker, what should you be doing? How do you mitigate the risk, irrespective of what industry that you are in? For me, it's about employability. So what are those skills that you can gain, irrespective of the industry that you're in, that are in demand? So it could be in demand in your industry, because we saw that in as much as there are some industries that really took a knock, there are some professions or there are some skills that are almost recession proof, if I can call it that. So it's an instance where even in recessions, even in economic downturns, they are still desired, or they are still required, or in some cases they even become more important. So it's really about thinking, well, within my industry, what are those skills that almost help to hedge the impact of the risks, the risks that are there, and of course, more importantly, employability. So employment is it's a static state, so to speak. So having a job today does not mean I'm going to have a job tomorrow or a job next month. So, we see that retrenchments happen, and, in many cases, they've become so widespread, and they're not only specific to one industry. So as a job seeker, you might think, well, how do I hedge my bets? How do I ensure that I keep myself secure? How do I keep myself recession proof, so to speak? And employment, as I mentioned, is a static state, but employability, it's those skills that make you competitive and that allow you to navigate the market, such that if you were to, unfortunately lose your job today or get retrenched, you know that you have the capability or you've got those in-demand skills that are able to at least shorten your unemployment, right? So of course, the job market is very tough, I think, for everyone, for most industries, so to speak. But what you want to do is to ensure that you are competitively positioned so that even those few jobs that are there, you are well positioned to be able to, be the selected candidate. So I think employability, and it's not only about the skills, it's also your ability to self-sufficiently navigate the market. That's where actually a lot of people struggle. So you find that I have the right skills, I'm the best candidate, I'm extremely competent at my job, but can I self-sufficiently navigate the job market? And what are those job-seeking behaviors that I need to adopt? So we find in many cases, some people would have been at a job for 10 years. A lot of the clients or people that I dealt with were people that never had to look for a job for the last 5 to 7 years because, they were not planning on leaving their company. They were experiencing growth. And of course, retrenchment and, company closures, etc., happened literally unexpectedly for many people. So they now found themselves, having to put together a CV and say, where do I even start? The last time I was on the job market, things were so different. I think that's a skill that's going to become more important because then it builds you for resilience. And it almost ensures that, should the worst happen, at least from your side, to the best of your ability, you are well equipped to make sure that you can find your next opportunity, whether that's in full-time employment, freelancing, gig work. And I think people need to be a little bit more open now. I know that the ideal for many people is to get a full-time job, right? Which is not, which of course is expected, as it comes with the security, the benefits, etc. But we're actually finding that the world and I think even the employment type of contracts are moving a lot, adopting more flexi workers, etc. And of course, that's a conversation for another day. So for those in the job market, I just want you to be open-minded, especially if it is taking you significantly long. You might have to open yourself up to temporary opportunities, contract work, gig work, freelance, etc. There are many ways to be employed right now, especially while you're waiting for that full-time employment, if it is, not coming through as easily as you would want it to.
Thanks. You touched on it quite a bit in terms of skills, but so in the new job market, it seems, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like it's almost better to be multi-skilled or knowing a little about a lot as opposed to knowing a lot about a specific subject or a specific field. And if that is the case, what do you think are good complementary skills for young people to develop when they're going to the job market?
Yeah, good question. So should you be a generalist, like multifaceted, or should you be a deep specialist? And, the answer, there isn't a right or wrong answer. It really all depends, so there's of course benefits of being multi-skilled because then you're versatile for different industries. You're able to adapt, for different roles. There are also benefits that come with being a deep specialist or having a niche, because then it means you're one of the few people within that niche, and there's benefits that come. So it really is a pros and cons, and I don't think that there is any one right answer. It's what's right for you, and of course looking at other contextual factors. But for young people, you need so around what skills should I be building, what makes me versatile. What we see a lot, and especially with new emerging jobs, jobs literally that didn't exist 2 years ago, existing today, it's about transferable skills. So what are those skills that I have now that I can apply to another environment? And a lot of transferable skills are often, soft skills, because that's what we also find to be something that is not easily automatable. So, a lot of the technical skills can be replaced by automation, and we find, that's where actually automation starts. But those soft skills are things that you can develop. So things like your complex problem solving. In fact, think of maybe some of the more technical transferable skills, things such as, project management. And I know project management looks different in different domains, but the ultimate principles of, managing a project, in HR, yes, the context is different. Some of the nuances are different, but those are some of the skills, especially if you want to go into a new industry that, employers look for. Leading a team, working with the team, managing people, so there's many soft as well as, certain technical skills that are transferable. And if you're trying to be versatile, that's how you're able to position or pitch yourself to an employer to say, look, I've not worked in this industry as such, but here are the 3 or 4 skills that I've been using that are definitely important, or that can contribute to me being successful within this particular role. And I think that's something that people need to do a better job at doing, especially given that we have new emergent roles that you might want to move into, but don't have a historical context in terms of working in.
No, that helps a lot. Phiona, tell me, what is one piece of advice you would maybe give your younger self?
So, and I think maybe speak, to the point that I mentioned earlier, when it comes to careers, and in fact, the world of work is now actually moving more and more towards that direction. People feel that there is a linear path. I need to start here, and then this is the next step. So I know careers, particularly in the older days, you kind of had a linear, very straightforward path. I'm a CA, I graduated as a CA, and this is the path for a CA. But what we're actually finding now, right, is careers are very versatile. So there are multiple ways to grow. There are, people career switch. For example, you don't always have to stay in your job family. So by job families, and if I graduate as a human capital profession, I'm going to die as a human capital profession, so to speak. So I think I want one, especially for young people. And I would have said to myself, don't put so much pressure on yourself to have it figured out and to have a great start. And yes, if you have a great start, that's absolutely great. But I can promise you, if you speak to anyone or to majority of people that are successful in their careers, you will hear there was a very bumpy road. There were detours. They spent years in maybe a job that they didn't enjoy. But ultimately, for me, it's about how do you curate each experience to, of course, lead you to where you want to be. So don't put pressure on yourself to have this perfect path and to have it all figured out. And especially, in fact, in my younger years, I was not, I guess, as aware in terms of career development as I am now. So many of the things that I did were trial and error. And of course, that was for me what my learning experience was. But where you are able to get, now there is a myriad of career development resources that are available, many that we didn't have during the time when I graduated many moons ago. So I would also encourage you to make use, of mentors, of people that are in your industry. A mentor for me has been absolutely invaluable within my career, and it's never too early. In fact, I would encourage you to say, as early as you can, get a mentor, someone to guide you, because there is always someone who has walked the journey before you that can give you the shortcuts, that can give you the insights. Many of the things that I struggled with in my earlier career could definitely have been avoided, or could have at least been more smoother if I had engaged a mentor who was going to guide me through that process.
I really like also what you said about not worrying about figuring things out. I was telling somebody the other day, I've been working for 14 years, and it's probably only like 2 years ago I was like, oh, now I'm enjoying what I'm doing. Now I'm in the place where I think I should be. The 10, 11 years before that, it was just like chasing or trying to figure it out. So you don't have to be, okay, now I'm qualified, so I need to know what I want. And these things come with time. Absolutely. I'm going to move over. Sorry, carry on.
No, I said absolutely. And it's an evolving journey. So, if you figure it out, and then for the next 5 years, you're finding meaning in what you're doing, in 5 years' time, you'll come to a crossroad, right? So it's like an ongoing loop. Before in career development, we would have this almost like age, this almost like age line, with where you should be in your career. But now it's not, it's an ongoing loop where you can literally be evolving as an ongoing process. So don't feel that because I've committed to this, now I must die with this commitment, so to speak. And I think it really opens us up to have many opportunities where we can reinvent ourselves and pivot as many times, as is desirable for us.
I'm going to move over to questions, because there's a couple of questions coming through from the audience. Okay. We've got a question here from Khoa, who says she studied industrial psychology and have a keen interest in organizational development, but I find it quite difficult to access opportunities. What advice can you give me to get exposure in this career path?
So I'm not sure if she is employed or if she is a student. So I'm guessing. So if it's a case, right, and I think this applies to where you studied something, but maybe there is an area of that industry you would like to get exposure to. For me, one of the best ways to do it is through networking, right? So actually find out who are the professionals, or who are whether it's, because it's not always industrial psychologists that do OD, although a lot of industrial psychologists are in OD. So find out who are the people that are in OD within my industry, connect with them on LinkedIn, build relationships, and that's how you are able to access those opportunities. Because once you have networking relationships, you can then, get to a point where you ask for exposures, right? So let's say you're employed full-time, you might say, hey, I'd really love to learn more about this field. Can you be my mentor? Can we spend, 1 hour a month where you expose me in terms of the work that you do. I want to understand what you do on a day-to-day basis, etc. So it's really about building those relationships. Okay, so employed but not in the industry. For me, build relationships and find a mentor within that industry. So find an OD practitioner or someone that is working in that field that you can build a relationship with. In fact, you could even explicitly ask someone that you identify to be your mentor. And through that way, they can, one, expose you in terms of what does the role involve, and more importantly, open up network opportunities, especially if it's a case. And I find that's probably one of the best things that you can do. In some instances, if you are employed, and let's say you work in another department, if there is an OD department at your place of work, go and build relationships with those people, get to know them, actually have coffee sessions, find out what they do, find out where you can help on a volunteer basis in your spare time, any documentation that they're comfortable, with you reviewing, looking. So get your hands dirty, so to speak. But for you to get access to that, you have to identify people that almost like let you in, so to speak.
That networking advice is so important. What I also find is that some people can be very focused on like corporate, like this is what I do in corporate. They don't realize that in SMEs is a totally different world, and your mentor might be sitting there, but because you're not seeing it like with a big brand on the top, that you might be missing out on a totally different opportunity because you're not thinking about reaching out to people who are not at a listed company, as an example. See, there's a question here. Somebody says they've got a passion to undertake studies in forensic psychology, but South Africa doesn't hold these qualifications in tertiary institutions. Do you have any advice for them?
So if I look at the 6 categories within psychology that are recognized in terms of by the Health Professions Council in South Africa, yes, it's true that forensic psychology is. I'm not sure though. In terms of it's not offered at anywhere, because I sort of do feel at 1 or 2 instances I've met people who have studied it, but I guess it's not a profession. That you can register as a Health Professions Council, so to speak. So in that regard, maybe it's a case of exploring in terms of, what is the problem you want to solve? So is it that you want to solve psychological problems of a forensic nature? And in fact, you might actually be surprised, because in an instance where you feel a profession is underrepresented, go on to LinkedIn and actually try and Google forensic psychology. And what I often find, right, and this is a neat trick, it will pull up, of course, people that have that in their title somewhere. And if you find that, there are some of them that are here based in South Africa, reach out to them. So I'll give you an example. Although organizational psychology is, of course, it's a profession that is known in South Africa. At that time, I didn't really have much networks of people working in the field. So what I did is I went on LinkedIn, I Googled organizational psychologist, and it pulled up all the organizational psychologists that I guess that were there in LinkedIn. And what I did is I went and I looked at the companies that they were working at, because as you mentioned, people only know the big brand companies, the big, right? But I was like, actually, they all can't work at the big companies. Where else am I missing? And when I went through their history, I could also see that, okay, so they've worked at this company, then I would go and research the company. So I think for me, try and see if there are any South African-based people with forensic psychology in their bio, and have a conversation in terms of what exactly does this field or profession look like in the country? Is it well developed? What are my options? Because it could be a case where there might be people that are actually practicing it or doing it, but maybe they've qualified somewhere. But I think finding out from someone that is working within that profession or within that industry, so to speak, might be useful. Although there might not be a lot of them, I'm pretty sure that there is a few that you will be able to find and connect with.
And also, if I could add, you can also start, if you don't find that type of content anyway, you can start talking about that on LinkedIn. You can start being that person on LinkedIn. If you are known as being that person, people will come to you. So that's also an option that you could potentially use.
Absolutely.
We've got a question from Sisonke. What would you consider to be self-sufficient behaviors? Touching on your answer from earlier.
Yeah. So in terms of being able to navigate self-sufficiently in the job market, what that means is when it comes to your job search, so this is putting a CV together, having the different job search strategies, because people usually know the one way to look for a job, which is I wait for a vacancy and then I respond. But there's actually a whole host of other ways to look for a job, which are lesser known. But more importantly, what are those tactics? So by self-sufficient behaviors, or by effective job seeking behaviors, It means you're using the right strategies. You are well positioned. You have a good CV. You have good interview skills. So when you go into the job market, you are confident that from my side and my ability and my skills to look for work, to network as a job seeker, to basically use my networks and my contacts, as part of my job search, those skills, are to the best of my ability, and I'm doing the right things. I often find when I coach people, when I do workshops around job seeking, many people will be like, you know what, I feel more confident now. Because often it's like, I don't know if I'm doing the right thing. So that, because, one thing that people need to remember when it comes to your job search, there are certain things that are in your control and there are certain things out of your control. You cannot control the amount of jobs that are out there on the market. You can't control if a position is put on hold after you apply or whatever happens, right? But you certainly can control how well you're positioned, so that you know that on my side, in terms of the number of times I'm looking for a job, how my CV looks, how I'm positioning myself in interviews, how I'm networking, the things I'm saying when I reach out to recruiters and people in their DMs, all those things are effective, and they're basically, good contributors towards me looking for a job. So that's what I meant by self-sufficient behaviors, because in many cases, I find that people who are not navigating the job market effectively, one, I either have an over-reliance on one job search method, they're not doing the right things. Also, the job search intensity. You can't apply for one job every 6 weeks and say, why am I not getting a job? There has to be the right job search intensity in terms of frequency of activities, etc. So it's really about that entire plan coming together. So that's what it means. And then you are also confident. So you go into that interview, you go into those networking situations confident that I am equipped to do the right things to, of course, increase my opportunities at landing a job.
Okay, thanks. That's a great answer. I don't want to. I'm going to cut it there in terms of questions. Otherwise, I'll be keeping you the whole afternoon. But are there any last few words from you, or anything that we didn't discuss that you'd like the audience to know?
I think just my parting words, right? And this is more for job seekers. I know they're not the only population that are watching here, but I know that it is probably a very desperate situation right now for many job seekers. And for many of us, especially those on the job market, for those, it takes an emotional toll. It is mentally exhausting, it is mentally depleting. We have a huge amount of what is called discouraged job seekers. These are people who have given up. So for job seekers, what I want to say is, especially because the job market is tough and maybe you might find yourself in the market a little bit longer than you expect, it is important to take care of yourself and ensure that you take a step away from your job search, whether it's for a week or 2 days or 3 days or whatever, to replenish your energy, because you have to build yourself for resilience. And it is important because the only way to get out of an unemployment situation is to remain on the job market. And what happens is many will then become at risk of becoming despondent, that they stop looking, right? And of course, that has other effects. So I want you to know that it is okay to take breaks, for a week, for however long it is, because you find that in replenishing your energy and focusing on other things outside of the job search is going to help to build you for the long term, because the journey, unfortunately, for many job seekers within this season that we are in is long. And I think for me, that's really just the word of encouragement that I want to give them, during this time.
Looking after your mental health is very, very important. A reminder to everyone that the show is live on YouTube and will be available on podcast by tomorrow morning. If you're watching on YouTube or listening on the podcast and you feel that this has added value to you, don't forget to like and subscribe and click the notification bell so that you get automatically notified when the next episode comes out. Phiona, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks everyone for joining us for another episode of Tooways.